Wednesday, and thank you for taking the time to join our webinar. My name is Matthew Maurer, and I'm a marketing coordinator here at Coastal Business Supplies. Today, I'm very excited to be joined by Jeremy Pilcher, the resident expert on the HP Stitch dye sublimation printers at HP. Today, he'll be providing us with a deep dive into the variety of HP Stitch's applications. So, hello, Jeremy.
Good morning. How are you?
How are you?
I'm doing well. Doing well.
Also on the call, or not on the call, also on the webinar, I have Darcy Jeffrey Anderson. He's with our Professional Solutions team. Hey, Darcy.
Hi, everyone. Hello, Matthew. Happy Hump Day.
Hey. Darcy will be here to help answer any questions that you might have throughout the webinar. So if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to send them our way. And with all of that said, I'm going to turn it over to Jeremy here.
All right. Thank you, Matthew. And on behalf of HP, I'd like to thank Coastal for letting us do this webinar in tandem. This webinar is part of the HP Underground Stitch webinar series. And as you can see, this is not at the GEC or at our demo center, which is in Atlanta. It is slowly getting back to work, but I was able to get creative during these times and actually bring the S500 here to my house, put it up in my basement, and be able to do demos as well as webinars with this printer here. And there are a lot of features that I like about this printer. That is really going to be for another webinar. Today we want to dive in or do a deep dive into the applications that we can provide with our HP Stitch dye sub printers. And then with that being said, I want to go ahead and dive into the list of applications that we can achieve with this printer. All right, so I'm going to share my screen here. Now, it would be fair to say that we can't really talk about applications if we don't really understand where they came from. So as you know, that the HP Stitch printer is HP's dye sublimation textile printer. Today in this webinar, we're going to talk about what dye sub is, briefly talk about it, and then again, our applications. But next week, there's going to be another webinar with Coastal that we're going to jump into the different textile applications. And I briefly want to talk about those today before we dive into the applications. But here on the screen before you'll see how textiles began. So pre-industrial period, a lot of handmade machines, as well as everything that was done by hand. So it's very time sensitive, took a long time. Then the Industrial Revolution hit in the 18th century, and not only did steel and iron start to boom, but also textiles started to evolve and started to become easier and to be made and to be made quicker. Then in the 70s, because of cost and pricing, everything started to go offshore to Asia. And down here in the South, where I'm from, I kind of live in what's called the textile belt that goes from Mississippi all the way to North Carolina. And the Carolinas are actually a hotspot for textiles. A lot of jobs got lost during that period. So in the 21st century, micro factories have started popping up. And I think this started happening before COVID-19, but even after COVID-19, I think there's going to be a lot of push for things to be reshored, for these micro factories to start popping up and start being utilized, where you can have smaller runs and then you can do them quicker. So, and then who knows what the future holds for textiles, especially now as we await what the new normal is going to look like. So with these printing technologies, again, we'll talk more in depth on this next week when we dive into the textile market. But I want to show you the difference between analog and digital and how much percentage it is versus the two. So analog textile printing makes up about 95% of the textile industry, with leaving about 5% as being digitally printed. That's a big number. So what is going to help drive digital? It's going to be custom made, custom prints, and custom prints that need to be done in a faster time frame. As you guys know, it's going to take longer to do. You're going to have longer runs to do anything that is going to be analog. So just kind of a teaser here for next week. Textile fabrics. So what all are the fabrics that can be printed on? Well, cotton, and then you have your animal fibers, your wool, your silk, your mohair, and then you have your polys. Now we're really going to focus on our polys because, as you know, dye sublimation can only print on polyester or a blend thereof. So moving on to the next slide, the marklet applications that we are going to focus on today is going to be soft signage, flags, decor, apparel, and sportswear. But if you want to just kind of take a broader look at this screen, you can see the different types of dyes, your high dispersion, your sublimation, which is also a type of dispersed dye, which is normally going to be your low energy. Your high dispersion is a high energy. Reactive acid pigment and latex are all other types of fabric applications. We'll dive into these next week, but again, if you just want to kind of look at this screen, take a screenshot, we're going to drill into these a little bit more, or well, we're really going to drill into them next week. So but for today, we're going to focus on signage, flags, decor, apparel, and sportswear. So pros and cons of the dye sublimation workflow. So a couple of the pros, the ink is completely absorbed into the fibers. It actually goes into the fibers as a gas, and it actually dyes the individual threads or the fibers of the material. So with that, you have a soft hand. So you keep the same hand that your material or your fabric had. When you put a surface ink on it, like a pigment or latex or UV, that hand changes. It gets stiffer. You have very vivid colors here with dye sublimation as well. Again, you are taking on the aspects of your material. So if your material has a lot of optical brighteners, which is the solution they put into it to make your fabrics look bright white, then these colors are going to take on that appearance. So not only are you going to have like a black, but your black is going to have a very nice sheen look to it as well, as if the fabric has that. So wide color gamut, and it's easy to set up and print these. Looking at some of the cons, low light fastness. So as I mentioned in the previous slide, you have a low energy dye. For this application, it's only going to last about, let's say outdoors, about 4 to 6 months. So if any of your type of flag material would really need to be promotional. It's not going to be something that's going to stay up year after year. It's probably going to be something you're going to put up for a couple months for a promotional event that you have going on. Calendar as an individual step. Now with dye sub printing, it's not really a print and done type process. This is a process that what I call part of the printing process is the calendaring. So you have to calendar these prints for it to be done. So a lot of people look at that as a con, as it is another step to printing. For me, I've been in dye sub going on 13 years. That's really not a con for me. I'm used to it. So I guess it depends on where you're at in your process, if you're starting out in dye sub or if you're used to dye sub. Also, being transferred from paper. As you know or don't know, when you run something through a heat press, and the heat press really isn't anything more than a laminator. So you run two materials together, and when it comes out, like in this case, all the ink is then on the fabric. Well, in that process, because you have two different papers, or a paper and a tissue paper, and your fabric going through the heat press, well, there's a lot of things going on in the heat press, a lot of things that can happen in the heat press or coming out of the heat press that could add issues. So being transferred from paper, it can be a con. Another con is that with your blends, if you decide to print on a blend, you can't go any more than 70%. Now, that's not to say, I've had some linens that, early on that I accidentally, when I was in production, sublimated to. Now, does it take the color? It would take some of it, but then it washes off very easily. So in your blends, you can print lower than 70%, but it's not going to look that good. So having that threshold there can be a con in some cases because it kind of limits you to polyesters or heavily blended polyesters. So in this, so our 4 verticals, I've kind of selected it here and put them into 3. I grouped the sportswear and the fashion together. And then I also put the flags under the soft signage. Here's a bird's eye view of how these markets are addressed with certain textile printing. And you'll see in soft signage that the dye sub transfer is 84%. Home decor sublimation is 33%, which is offset heavily by reactive. And then our sportswear and fashion is highly printed using pigment and reactive. So, and then sublimation is about 18% of this market. Now, I will tell each one of these markets have been growing pre-COVID. Interior decor, when I was in production, we did a lot in the interior decor section of dye sublimation, and each year I would say it was about a 5% growth. So as your polyesters get a better feel, they feel more like a cotton, people will gravitate towards polyester because it's cheaper to get, and in a lot of cases you can get your orders can come in faster. So the addressable markets, and where does dye sub play in each one of these markets? Well, if you look at the stars, 3 stars is excellent, 2 is good, and 1 is poor. Dye sublimation plays very well in each one of these markets, with the interior decor as a 2. I would say in the next coming years, you will probably see this get a little better, just because of how the textiles are changing year after year. So workflows in dye sublimation, what are we looking at? What does it look like to apply these applications in dye sub? Well, really, there's 2 workflows in dye sublimation. There's transfer, and then there's direct to print. Our HP Stitch S printer series can do both of these very well. Our inks are attenuated to be very good with transfer and direct, as well as these, as well as the printer does a very good job with the take up of the 2 different type of materials. So with paper transfer, you print it on the paper, you put the paper and the fabric through the heat press or the calendar, and you can use tissue paper, and then the result is the image on the fabric. So on the right, I don't want to bore you with numbers, but you can see the difference between direct and the transfer in the addressable market. So under the direct category, you will see that you print on the fabric. Fabric goes to the heat press with the tissue paper, so you don't mark up your belt on your calendar. And the end result is the same roll, but the color is bloomed, and it looks way better than it did when it was printed. Now, you can go down to 150 degrees when you print direct. Now, again, this depends on the material. Some materials do very well at that temperature. Others, you're going to want to run it a little bit hotter. So I don't want to get too technical here, but a lot of times the lower the temp you get, the more blue you have in your images. Cyan is the first one to start blooming in your heat press, and it's also the first one to burn. So if you leave something there too long, cyan's going to keep sublimating, and it's not going to set within the material. So be very careful if you're going to run something down at 350. Just know, have a good profile for that, but also know that sometimes the lower the temp that you have, the more blue that your images are going to appear. So what's the difference in, direct to fabric versus transfer? This is a question that I get a lot. So I felt like I really had to put it in here to address these. Well, transfer paper, you get better sharpness, you can actually print faster print modes, and you can address stretchable fabrics, which is the printer can't really address stretched fabrics very well. Now we can to some extent, but still for me, if it's going to be a stretchable fabric, I am always going to paper transfer that. I just have more settings on the heat press that I can dial. So direct, the more ink penetration, so you can add more ink, you can get the ink deeper into the material. So it's very good to get deeper colors. Now when I say deeper colors, the colors are going to look the same, but you're going to be looking at that color deeper into the material, rather than when you paper transfer something, it's going to only transfer on the surface part of those fibers. So also, there's no transfer paper needed in this for direct print. Now, with that, you will need tissue paper for your heat press, like I said in the earlier slide. But also, if you're going to print direct to print, you need a coated fabric. So what kind of heat presses are addressable for what vertical or what application? So here you see the clamshell flatbed, and then you see a roll to roll, or in a hybrid unit. Hybrid unit is for roll to piece, where you actually lay the garment or the cutout piece on top of the paper as it goes to the heat press. Roll to roll, that application is actually flipped. The paper goes in on the bottom, your fabric goes on top. It's made for a roll of paper to sublimate to a roll of material, and we'll dive into this a little bit more. And then your clamshell and your flat press. Now these are very good as they are cheaper options. So if you run sportswear and you pre-cut your materials for sportswear, then you can run them all on a flat press, as opposed to having to buy a hybrid calendar, which is more expensive. So if it's a market that you want to be able to get into, and you're worried about the cost of the heat press, there are other options as well, and I wanted to list those here. So here are the different applications. So again, on this one, there's technically 4. There's soft signage, there's sportswear, apparel, and home decor or interior decor. But for this segment, I have actually wrapped up the sportswear and the fashion all under the clothing line. So just to kind of keep things a little bit neater. So let's start with soft signage. Which printers are a very good option for soft signage, especially for HP? Well, it's each one of our printers. So the S1000, our 3.2 meter printer, our HP S300 and 500, again, are very good for the soft signage market. And the 300 and the 500 are 64-inch printers. Now, our 300 is more of an entry level, and our S500 is a workhorse. So here are the different types of soft signage. You have your typical frontlit, backlit, flags, textile displays, pop-up display, promotional carpets. We will actually look at that as well. A lot of people ask me about carpets. Can we do it? Can we not? I know some people that are hesitant to do it, but when I was in production, we used to run on carpets. Those were paper transferred. But we'll talk about those a little bit later. So starting out, frontlets. What are some of the kind of medias used? Knitted materials, soft knits, heavy knits. Some have a little bit of elasticity in it, about 3%. And let's look at some key performances. One of the overarching things that you're going to hear on each one of these, is shrinkage. Fabric, once it's heated up in your heat press, it's going to shrink. The mills or the fabric manufacturers, they heat set their materials, at about 390. So if you run 390 in your dye sublimation calendar process, then you're going to see very little shrink. If you run 400, even if you go up to 410, you're going to see more shrink because it's more heat. And if you have to run longer, more time in the higher heat, if it doesn't scorch the fabric, then it's definitely going to shrink it up a lot more. So always be very careful about how you print. For me, when I was in production, I had a sliding scale. So if it was at a certain size, I knew it needed to be printed at 101% all the way up to 105%. And that would be the scale that I put on my jobs when I printed them, being on what my post-production or what my calendar process was going to be for that material. So always know that fabric is going to shrink and it's always going to be a factor. So, keep that in mind. Another good a good benefit to frontlets is, or dye sublimating frontlets, is your color vibrancy. You're always going to have better color because you're actually dyeing the threads of the material. You're taking on the characteristics of the material. Your hand is actually going to feel better. You can actually fold these up. You don't have to roll them up. Very easy for you just to fold them up and ship them. What does that do for shipping costs? Well, it makes your shipping costs go down because your dimensional weight is a lot smaller. So what type of printing is good for this application? Transfer and direct. So you're going to have a little bit better of an IQ. Your images are going to be a little bit sharper, but depending on the application and what the customer needs, direct print could also be a good option for frontlets. SEG backlets. So typically these are done on knitted materials or coated material, or woven materials if coated. Now there's a very good woven material that Pongs makes, or Burger, or Top Value Fabrics. Coastal has some very good material as well, and it has actually coating on the back. So the back would be for well, I call it the back. If you're on the other side of the print industry, like UV or latex or solvent, you're going to print on that side. So it has a coating that you can print on UV. On the other side is for sublimation, and that is a woven fabric. And wovens have a bigger gap in between, certain types of wovens, but they have a bigger gap in between the threads just by how they're made. And if you're going to be on the webinar next week, we're going to drill down in the different types of knits versus wovens. So we're going to talk a little bit, we're going to talk definitely more about this, but for wovens, there is more of a space in between the strands that you can get a pinhole through when in backlit. So that coating on the back helps out a lot to disperse the light, but also to keep the pinholing effect down for dye sublimation. So what do you get when you use dye sublimation as a backlit application, where you get really good dark blacks because you're, again, dyeing the fabric? You're not going to get any folding marks. Again, it depends on the material, but in a lot of cases, you can just fold this up and ship it. And it's very good for SEG because, again, those threads are dyed and they're not going to scratch off like surface ink. So in the corners, if this is a display that's going to go up and come down multiple times, it's very good to use dye sublimation for this application. So with this printing type as well, it works very good paper transfer, but the majority of people direct print this. So what are the advantages versus our competitors, or latex or UV? I've listed a couple there: color matching, soft hand, folding, water resistance. Disadvantages, you're going to see this a lot, is going to be light fastness. But honestly, I don't know of a lot of people that put soft signage backlit outdoors. If it's going to be an outdoor backlit, like at a bus stop, it's going to be a hard good. Flags. So put out a quick caveat about this. This isn't a directly dedicated flag printer. Now that doesn't mean that we can't do flags. It's just not a 24/7 flag printer. Now, with that being said, the S1000 very good for flags. The 500 is good for flags as well, just maybe not the majority of your workflow being flags. So with that being said, a lot of people like to print to see the same image on both sides, but being able to utilize our ink collector system where it actually allows the ink to jet through the material. And so when you sublimate it, you see both sides. There's about 80 to 90, anywhere from 80 to 90% pass through onto the back side. Some fabrics, I've even seen up to 95%. But again, that fabric was coated directly for flag printing. So is something to look at. Light fastest, again, you're probably not in the state of Georgia going to get more than 6 months. Again, this is based on the time that the flags are in direct sunlight. So here it may be up to 6 months, but somewhere in like California, Arizona, somewhere that has a lot of sun and a lot of heat, it's going to be a lot less than that. So again, shrinkage is another thing that we talk about. And then the direct is the most used application for this part. Some of the advantages, disadvantages, I'll let you guys read through those really quick. And we will move on to the next one. So stretchable fabrics. The designs for displays are getting more and more intricate every year, as you can see is the one that we used here. So what are some of the substrate types? Heavy knit, soft knit, elasticity, 3%, two-directional. Stretch would be a very good application or a very good material for this type of application. Key performances, your ink coverage. So what you want to be able to know here is when you stretch the material, we have something called grinning. So anything that's not sublimated under the top layer, when you pull or when you stretch that material out, you're going to see white. That's what we call grinning. So in this case, you want to be sure that you use a lot of pressure when you're transfer printing, and you might want to slow down your heat transfer a little bit. So slow down that time a little bit, allow the ink to jet into the material as best as it can. Advantages, disadvantages, color matching, folding, water resistant, stuff that we've been talking about, and again, color fastness. Carpets. This is one that I get a question about a lot. A lot of people are kind of hesitant about it, but this is really a good transfer process. I would say if you're going to do this, use a heavier paper, but you get really good ink coverage. The rub resistance is really good because, again, it's a sublimated fabric. Advantages, disadvantages, pretty much the same as the rest. So moving on to the clothing line. So what printers are good for the clothing line? S500, S300. Why? Well, because the material for the clothing line is not going to be any more than 60 inches. So these printers are very good for that application. Now, with sportswear especially, you're going to have some slightly different workflows out there. First workflow is what I call roll to roll. And with roll to roll, you have you print it, you heat transfer, and then you cut it, and then you sew it. So with the picture that you can see there, that is a sportswear garment that looks like a running jersey, and that is done as a roll to roll. So what are some of the pros and cons of roll to roll printing? Well, you can do multiple sizes in one run. It's a cleaner process and higher quality, and there's no stock of pre-cut textiles per size, so you don't have to keep a lot of cut material on hand. You just use the roll. What are some of the cons? Well, there's a higher initial investment. There you can only use one textile per run. So let's say if you had your sleeves as a different type of material, you would have to batch it and run those on a different roll. There are more production steps doing it this way, and you have a higher volume of waste because you see all the white there on the little video that we have. All that is going to, don't have to buy all that waste. So what is the next workflow with this? Well, this is a roll to piece type workflow. This is where your pieces are pre-cut, like you'll see there on the screen, and they are laid on top of the paper going through the heat transfer machine. Now, what machine is this they're using here? This is the hybrid machine, or top feeder as I like to call it. So what are some of the pros and cons of this? Well, it's a lower investment. You can actually use different textiles even in the same production run. A large heat press or a clamshell can also be used for this to save on cost. You don't have to run this roll to roll. And some of the cons, it's a little bit more labor intensive as you have to stack down the rolls or stack the prints on, or the cutout pieces on top of the prints. You have to make sure that they are lined up. You have to have a large stock of pre-cut textiles and sizes, and it's less flexible in sizes per production batch or longer runs, and there's more failures that can happen because of because of what's happening when you place it on the cut piece on top of the paper. A lot of times you might accidentally put it on there crooked, and then it is then it's going to be a rerun or a reprint. So sportswear, what are the different types of sportswear materials? Or, in this case, it's all wearables. So, one of my favorites is printed socks. Can you actually sublimate on socks? Yes. I have seen some videos online, and this printer as well, the S500 300 would be a very good option to use for printing socks. Some of the other ones, shorts, bicycling tops, technicals, even as far as the ski uniform. One of my favorite technicals is there's an MX outfit or jersey that you would wear, for motocross. I also wore that as during my applications deep dive when we have the Stitch Advantage events. So as one of my favorite technical sportswear applications. So sportswear as a whole, it's mainly going to be polyester. So the PES that you see it means polyester. And so what are some of the key performance aspects of this? Well, the softness of the print, white color spots, the minimum shrinkage on this. A lot of this is going to be transfer papered. You get a lot of saturation, a lot of sportswear, bright colors, heavy saturation. Light fastness, even though it's not good to be, it's going to start fading outdoors. But how often or how many times are you outdoors in direct sunlight day after day with it? Not as much as it would be if it's set as a flag that's set outside all day. So what are some other types of blend polyesters? 90, 80, 70. Again, I wouldn't go under 70 on this. And then some of the difficulties with this is, color matching between different textiles, especially ones that have different types of brighteners. The stretching can also be a problem. Like I talked about greening earlier, that can happen here a lot. And then gradients. A lot of companies want to use that do sportswear printing want to use some very intricate type of gradients, and in a lot of cases, has kind of an adverse effect. So, case in point, if you go from a red gradient into a black, that's can also cause issues in those transition points. So fashion, let's briefly hit on this. From what are some of the types in fashion? Well, the satins, the textiles for ties, tops, dresses. Now, with fashion, these are going to be a pattern or a step and repeat or a fabric by the yard type pattern, and they're going to be ran roll to roll. There's not a lot of piece goods here, so these is pretty much a fabric by the yard pattern type printing. And the majority of it is going to be paper transferred. So one of the key performances here is sharpness. You're going to have that. So what are the advantages that we have on this? Well, again, a bigger color palette, and digitally it allows us to do shorter runs. So so for online providers, I know Amazon does this, and there's Stitch Fix as well. They do this for online shopping. Everything is made to order, which also gives digital textiles a leg up in the fast fashion market. So in fashion and sportswear, it's very big with brands. Brands like to utilize this. So what brands are we? Do we have approval? And they have tested? Well, Adidas is one of them. Nike, we are still a work in process with it, but with Adidas, we are approved with our ink set. So let's move on to home decor. So home decor, interior decor, 3 different segments here. So print on demand, you have a web to print or a B2C. You have your application specialist, which these guys are going to mainly be analog printers, offset printers that are looking into digital or utilize digital in a small form because they have to, because their customers are asking. And then your contract manufacturer. This is the realm that I came from. And a lot of times, you see many times hidden since the work is for fashion brands. We did a lot of work for online retailers. And so we were the production house for those retailers, and we decided to really stay in the shadows. So these are the 3 different parts or dye sublimation or textile printing aspects of the of this part of this segment of the industry. So what printers are good for interior decor? All of them. And here are some of the applications that we have for or some of the applications that are out there for this market. You'll see beddings, curtains, blinds, blankets, carpets, towels, cushions, the upholstery, and then also lampshades. That is actually a big one. So what are these applications used for? Well, they're used in the home. They're also used in restaurants. So a lot of restaurants, is for curtains, even for backdrops, are moving towards textile. Hospitality, hotels, they've really taken a hit with COVID, but dye sub is very good because of the coatings. A lot of times the coatings or the FR treatment and the certifications that the fabric has make this a very good option for hospitality. Also, your office space, another place that was hit very hard by COVID-19, but coming back to the office also is going to look very different. So with dye sublimation, you can also start to print divider panels or separation panels. Those are going to be a big thing, I feel like, coming back on the flip side of this COVID-19. Healthcare is another big one. A lot of places are starting to utilize dye sub more in the healthcare market. Why? Because the ink's green, the material's green. There's no VOCs in the material because of how the material is made and because of the ink set. Also, window blinds. Now, a lot of people realize that a lot of window blinds are sublimated. And you might be asking the question, well, what about light facets? What about if light hits it? Well, a lot of these have a blocker on the back. So it has a blocker on the back and it has the material on the front side that you can sublimate to. So dye sublimation is a very good option for custom photo blinds or even in the promotional or branded sector. So the upholstery, again, polyesters, and this is going to be a lot of woven materials. Polyesters are getting, their hand is getting better. They're getting less stiff. They're feeling more like cotton. So with that, it's a very good option to get to utilize dye sublimation in this part of the industry, as well as the fast part of it. And when I say fast, I mean being able to go online, order it. Say you want to order a pillow, and then you can order it, and then it can be at your house within 2 to 3 business days, and that means that these were most of the time sublimated. So key performances here: grammage, paper grammage, also, or I'm sorry, grammage of the material. That's a pretty high grammage for paper. Performance, images don't wash off, they don't fade, they're very good for the upholstery market. Paper transfer is suggested and mainly used in this market. And then the purpose is to have custom designs for your individual customers. So promotional applications, and we'll talk a little bit more about this on another slide, but HP's promotional aspect that we are playing in, bags, pillows, and most of them are going to be polyester, if not some blend. There are going to be paper transfer as well. So you'll see all the on the right side, all the advantages, disadvantages that we have over our competitors. So with that being said, these promotional items that we are pushing with this printer, these are soft, right? So the bag, it's a soft, it's fabric that is, it's fabric used for a bag. Same with the pillow. Then this next slide, we're going to talk about the promotionals of hard substrates. Now here, we don't really play in this market, and there are some things about this printer for those reasons why we don't play in this market yet. HP, I believe, is moving that direction. I don't see why they wouldn't be. But for now, our printer has a fixed dot size. So those dots are going to be more prevalent when they are sublimated onto a hard good. Now, what I'm saying here is, does the color look great? Do they look vibrant on these types of materials? Yes. But in some of the colors, like in gradients or lighter colors, you may get some grain, an unwanted grain on the hard substrates. So I just wanted to put this slide in here and mention it because I know people are doing this to some extent on hard goods already. And in a lot of cases, even though we say we're not playing in this area, people are still going to try it. But there are some things on this slide that this printer works almost flawless for. So your bags, your tote bags, your flags, your towels, the textile applications on the left. The ceramic items, the flat objects, probably not any of those. 3D objects. So on the right, you'll see some of those. The pillows, the canvases, the t-shirts, a very good application for dye sub in the promotional market. So we talk about COVID-19 and what has happened with it. I can't talk about all these applications without talking a little bit about the Application Center in PrintOS. I know I'm going a little bit later on time. I wanted to be done about 5 minutes ago, but I really feel like I need to talk about PrintOS here. PrintOS is our in PrintOS. I have another webinar specifically for PrintOS, and that's where we can do our deeper dive into this. But in PrintOS, we have what's called the Application Center. It's only one part of the PrintOS cloud structure. But in that, you can utilize it to make or to have a landing page for your customers to go on and order and make a design that they want. So here on the screen, you'll see this is pretty much everything that is in our application center. As you know, we do share this with latex. So for dye-sub, definitely we're not going to have wall coverings or wall decals for dye-sub, but we do have window blinds, roll-up banners, cushions, and t-shirts. So all of these things we can utilize within the application center of PrintOS. So this gives your customers a very good landing page to go in, custom build their window blinds, and then that order goes straight into your system. And so what I mean by that is and this is a little bit of what it looks like on the picture on the left, where you can go in, you can select from images that we have, you can upload your own, and then once it's done, it will be a print-ready PDF, ready for your system, ready for your printer. Now, we just added in the application center a COVID-19 area. So we have face masks, and we will soon, and we also have floor graphics that are coming for the latex side, and we're going to be adding gowns in the future or other types of PPE. So here we added this because, well, honestly, we don't see it really going anywhere. And if this thing decides to spike back up at the end of the year or in the fall, then we want to have a place here for you guys to be able to utilize this for your production. So we didn't only want to just come up with a cookbook or a how-to. We wanted to make it different. So we actually put it in the application center so your customer can go on and design the kind of mask they want and upload it and then print it. So here really quick is kind of a preview of what it looks like. You can actually look at a 3D rendering of it, which I feel like is really cool. And then you can select from a brand, a pattern, or even upload your own. So with that being said, that pretty much wraps up, I say pretty much, but that does wrap up everything that I have in for this session.
Thanks for joining us again. You all have a great rest of your day, and look forward to talking with you again soon.
All right. Very cool. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Jeremy. Take care.
Yeah. Take care, guys. Thank you.